Well, hey everybody, welcome back to our discussion of Christian faith in the coronavirus era. I'm Tim Breen, along here with Travis Ells and John Lee, my colleagues in ministry. And today we want to address the question of trust. So many leadership folks, gurus, writers have said that trust is the currency of leadership, that it's the kind of capital that we have to use to accomplish things that we feel called to do. It's expendable. It diminishes. It can be augmented. It can grow. But trust is a tricky one these days because we're living in a world where people are not sure really who to trust. People trot out experts who will validate their prior opinions, and those are the trustworthy sources. Travis, as you think about this question, how to lead a congregation and how to be a leader in a community in a time when trust is up for grabs in some sense, what kind of questions and themes arise in your mind? How do you do it now?
Yeah, that's the $25,000 question. How do we do this? And it is unique, I think, in this age. So I think in our faith communities, certainly 100 years ago, but maybe even a quarter century ago, the pastor was likely the most educated person within the church, and so there was some deference given to him because of that, and so he had this sort of influential or positional authority that was just rooted in the position. And obviously that's not the case today. There are a lot of PhDs in our churches and really well-educated people. And that was in a broader context of people having just an enormous amount of suspicion about everything. We can't trust the scientific community. We can't trust the industrial media complex. Can we really trust our pastor? Because he's been to seminary. So that's like a black mark. I'm exaggerating this a bit, but we've gotten to this position where so education's not going to do it, is not going to earn that trust. So what is it that's going to do it? And so I think I would come back to this. I think because this is such a relational vocation and faith in itself is inherently relational. I think it's ultimately rooted in being in people's lives and getting to know them on a personal basis and hopefully cultivating something where people may not agree with me, but they can at least trust me. And the degree to which that is going to be practiced today in these uncertain days of the pandemic are largely going to be determined by the relationships that have been cultivated in the years prior. So, for those who are church leaders in a new position who don't know people yet, this is a really hard season, I think. John, I don't know if this has been if you would share or echo any of those thoughts or have a different take on any of that.
No, I think that's well said, Travis. I mean, I think the conversation of how a pastor and a leadership team and a congregation find or don't find trust with each other is part of the larger social question that you've illustrated. Where do we turn for sources of trust? Just last week, Christianity Today reported a Pew study on the pandemic, particularly where people find trust, where they trust sources. And there is a marked difference, for example, between white evangelical Christians, other Protestant faiths, other ethnicities, et cetera, and then of course the non-Christian. And just it's very interesting to see that. I think we see that played out as we try to make decisions that are based on data. We have very different understandings of what data are to be trusted, right? And so that plays into how a pastor or a leadership team will then lead that conversation. We just had a council meeting on Monday night, and we were talking about that. And even as you talk about death rates, right? You can do the math in Iowa and say we have 14,000 some who have had coronavirus. The death rate is another number. You divide those out, that's 2.4%. You can go to the Washington Post, which is assuming that probably a 0.6% is where the numbers will come in if you to do broad testing. But then, I have elders or deacons who say, but how do we know those numbers are right? Maybe it's just 0.1%. It's probably worth less than the flu, right? And so then in that scenario, There is no, you can go to the World Health Organization, but that's discredited in some people's minds. You can go to the CDC. But I think even as you've looked at, you talk about trusting the science. I mean, the CDC at one point has said this was not passed human to human. And then they said it was droplets, not aerosol. Then they said, don't wear a mask. It'll be worse for you than if you do. And now, of course, all those things, and now they're saying the opposite. So I think people see this evolving situation, and they see that those in most authority are often completely doing 180s on them. And so when they're told, I'll trust the science, you say the science of Wednesday or the science of Tuesday, right? And again, and there are so many different media streams and so many different voices within those media streams. I just think we are, as church leaders, speaking into that void, right? And I think relationally, you've hit exactly, Travis, you have to be relational to build the sort of trust that is not there otherwise.
Yeah, it seems like for a number of people now, the medical expertise and the community leaders who are working in those professions are kind of like weathermen. Well, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. They just hope to be. But you're right, Travis. You talk about the word data, because we're still living in an era that was marked, and I'm talking about the Trump presidency, week one, by alternative facts. Remember Sean Spicer and the question of how many people were at the inauguration? Well, you have your facts, I have alternative facts. And we've become increasingly comfortable with alternative facts, not just interpretations of facts, but alternative facts, like you said. So are you dying from coronavirus or with coronavirus? And I think that what has grown up in this time is the conspiracy theory thing. And we should maybe talk about that just a little bit. Joe Carter had a great article today in the Gospel Coalition about QAnon and why this tends to be something that is attractive to evangelical Christians. In part, it's probably because in the coronavirus era in particular, many of the things that people had predicted or at least worried about, cashless society, multinational kind of groups, restrictions on cherished rights, actually have come to pass. So, John, how would you pastor someone who comes to you and is certain that these conspiracy theories are things that you need to attend to and maybe even incorporate into your understanding of the world and maybe even in the way you lead?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a pastor, as all three of us know, that you have the behavioral, the presenting problem, but you always try to reach down into the root, right? And because typically that's where you're going to find health and healing. And so with a pandemic, for example, would be one of those conspiracy theories. You can try to intellectually refute certain data points from that, but I don't think that gets to the root of why that's compelling for people. And so you want to go to ask the question below the question. You know, I've heard some people say they gravitate towards this because of fear. This is a time of uncertainty, of anxiety, and that gives you a scapegoat. And you can look in history. You know, the Jews, for example, during the bubonic plague were scapegoated for those. The witch trials often happened in times also of social anxiety. And so to be able to say it's Bill Gates or it's this other political party or this other nation gives us an avenue for our anxiety to find a landing space. I think besides, you know, fear, though, you know, besides that kind of anger scapegoat, I think it is fear. And so then really to answer the question isn't to refute the ideas, is to help them understand how to process fear in a healthier way. And, you know, I think part of what a conspiracy theory offers you, like you mentioned Gnosticism, Tim, it gives you secret knowledge. And with secret knowledge, you now have control, and the world is suddenly ordered again, or at least it's understandable, it's intelligible. And to give a different narrative, which the Christian tradition gives us, you don't have to have that secret knowledge and that little narrative about why the world works the way you think it does. We can talk about the sovereignty of God, the history of the arc of redemption that's flowing even in our day. And I think that story is more compelling to me and can quiet the fear and the anger. Travis, what would you say?
Yeah, and guys, this is also utterly fascinating. Conspiracy theories and QAnon particularly. There's a great article published in The Atlantic here in June. It's just asking the question, you know, what is going on? What is QAnon? Why do conspiracy theories? Why do they proliferate, especially in a season like this? And it is concerning to me because it's certainly in the church and amongst especially white evangelicals. And I think both of you guys, what you said is absolutely spot on. And what's most concerning to me is probably on two levels. First of all, that, you know, we are unfortunately and rather ironically living into this thing that for so long we had been sort of terrorized by. And what I mean specifically is postmodernism, right? There is no truth. All truth is to be questioned. And here it is, as evangelical Christians, we're the ones now standing here, you know, shaking our fists saying, well, you can't trust anybody, and whose truth, and your interpretation of the truth. And that is tragic. The second piece of it is, so that's certainly against sort of the conspiracy theory stuff. On the other hand, to speak a little bit more positively towards it, I think I sort of get it as well. And just as you said, Tim, it is people who are desperate for, maybe that was you, John, they're desperate for the truth. They're looking for some order. This is not an unusual occurrence, and it happens to arise during pandemics such as this, whether it's the bubonic plague or the Spanish flu, but also at a time when there's so much economic disparity, and there's just this sort of there's this visceral something that most people probably can't even fully articulate. Something's off in the world. They want to make it right. They're looking for an answer. So it's got to be right, the deep state or the media industrial complex or whatever. And so we need to go to war. And then you can tie this into sort of this apocalyptic stuff that, you know, we're all a little bit confused by in the book of Revelation. And, you know, you start connecting things, or at least trying to, and it gives some meaning in life. That's not a good thing. What I finally just, I'll close with this. On the other hand, I would say there is some reason for suspicion, right? For the same reasons that you said. There is a surprising and unnerving lack of certainty within science. And there is a great lecture, you can find it online. It's the Biologos people. So Francis Collins and Timothy Keller are having this conversation. And Keller often goes back to this. He said, you know, as Christians, we probably need to look at all this, whether it's the scientific community speaking or the conspiracy theorists. And we do two things simultaneously. We affirm and we deny. Right. And so we're going to resonate with some things, but we need to be ready to critique those same things. And we can afford to hold it loosely because, John, as you said, I mean, we know where the story's going. We don't need to know all the details, but we trust that all things are in the very capable hands of a sovereign God who loves us and loves his creation and is doing something about it. So maybe it's okay to just be content with that. That's all I got.
Going back to the late 80s, Warren Dennis developed this acronym VUCA. You guys have probably heard it. VUCA, the world, VUCA, is increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And boy, that's never been more true than it has been over the last month. But with all those things, as I think you said, John, the rising uncertainty kind of can degrade into fear. And when fear arises in people's minds, when they feel imperiled, their imaginations run wild. And I know, John, you've spent a lot of time in the country of Israel. I think about being in Safed there in the north. And this town has this great history of mysticism, and it's attributable to the unending wars and the times of devastation that have occurred in that community. And this kind of mystical understanding that there's something more going on here has helped them to make sense out of this ceaseless drumbeat of devastation, heartbreak, death, loss, plague, and disease. And I just think that it's the case that that's happening again, because when you have a functional theory, and I won't even say conspiracy, but if you have a theory, it helps you to make sense and narrative out of what was otherwise unclear, and it confirms your prior suspicions in most cases. People never have conspiracy theories where they realize they were wrong. It's conspiracy theories where they now know the truth that they've been right all this time. John, let me just end with this question because you alluded to this. Thinking about the information that comes out Monday versus Tuesday versus Wednesday, in a time like this where we're facing an unprecedented challenge, there has had to be course correction among our political leaders, our medical thinkers, our philosophers and thought leaders too. Where do you take a step out as a pastor and say, now we got it. Now I know what we need to do. Are you more necessarily hesitant and humble because of this? Or does there come a point where people are looking to you and say, okay, here's what we have to do next? How do you feel your way through that?
Well, I mean, I do think as leaders, part of the calling is to lead, but I think, you can do that with a posture of humility and a posture of patience, and humility plus patience equals nuance, as I read an article this week. And I do think actually people are looking for that. There's enough bombast and polarization behind that bombast that to be able to say, look, this is what we're looking at. This is the process we've been following. This is the best data we have, and this is our best attempt right now collectively to discern what the next step looks like. But we're going to be, that's contingent on things changing and us learning. And we just plead in advance for grace, because we're going to make mistakes and we're going to be stumbling our way through as we build an airplane while flying it, right? And I actually sent out an email in my congregation yesterday, and a lot of those were the notes. I kind of laid out a timeline of what we were planning for the next 3 weeks, but then majority of the email was the principles that had undergirded that decision, the process, and even part of that was a plea for grace and a kind of say we're humbly trying our best here, and we invite your prayers and discernment and feedback, right? I think that sort of thing resonates versus thus saith the scientist or thus saith the pastor.
Great spot to wrap it up. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, John. And we'll be back soon with part 3, Christian faith and the body of Christ.